People outside India just speak English. Japanese people don't speak Japanese, not at work. Actually, as soon as I arrived in Japan, I realized, actually, every country does not speak in their own language at work as well.
Did you have any kind of like unexpected realizations, kind of surprised you about how things were maybe done within a Japanese company? Did you have any kind of like preconceived notions about what it would be like to work in Japan? It sounds like you had a pretty positive image of Japan. At any point, did you kind of go online and do some research about like the Japan work culture? And if so, did you happen to see any kind of negative views as well? And did you have any anxiety about that?
So I think even before I entered university, I knew this word karoshi, which is like death by overwork. So there was some concern there. But because I had access to close friends within Mercari, so like I didn't have to look up anything about work culture because they gave me the direct insight. But I did look up a couple of things for like Japanese culture. But one incorrect assumption that I had was, people outside India just speak English. Japanese people don't speak Japanese, not at work, because there's a lot of undue importance on English education in India. So I participated. I put a lot of effort into it. Like I participated in debates, elocutions, speeches, spelling bees. So I was like, okay, I'm all set. And I found out that Japanese people speak Japanese at work. What do you mean? So I think that was kind of I wasn't prepared for it mentally, but yeah.
It's true. There are a handful of companies where English is going to be the kind of official language. And there are foreign companies with offices here where, of course, they'll work in English. But the vast majority of companies, that's not going to be the case. It's going to be pretty much Japanese. Yeah. So that was a surprise for you?
Yeah, actually, as soon as I arrived in Japan and like Mercari had a lot of people from different countries, I realized, actually, every country does not speak in their own language at work as well. So I was like, my teacher sold me on a fake dream, but I guess everything worked out.
Yeah. So you accepted the offer from Mercari, obviously, since here you are.
Yeah.
You made your way over to Tokyo. You arrived. What was it like actually joining the company, the onboarding process? It was all new, the realization that, there's going to be more Japanese maybe than I expected.
Yeah.
How did that process kind of go?
When I joined, most Japanese companies have a training period of 2 or 3 months. It teaches you basics of like Git, the language that you're going to use, and collaborating in a Japanese environment, stuff like that. So some of the training that was given within Mercari was for Japanese culture. That was useful. But the technical part of training for someone like me who had my fingers in pretty much every technology during university, it was kind of redundant because I was learning how to use Postman again. I'd already used Postman at an internship. I was learning how to use Git.
You knew how to use Git.
At that point, I'd been using Git for 4 years, and I had taken seminars to teach my juniors at university to how to use it. So I was like, I can easily replace you actually to give this lecture. So, but yeah, I understand. Like for new grads, they don't know what people have worked with.
Yeah, exactly. You have to, design it around maybe the least common denominator, and there are probably other places that are not going to prepare you quite as much as like an IIT would. So
yeah, you could see like the Japanese approach to things. Like there was an abundance of caution everywhere. But I think it was still a good time because it was the first 3 months for me to live outside my home country. So I could use that time to recalibrate, like make connections at work and stuff like that.
Did you have any kind of like unexpected realizations, or was there anything that kind of surprised you about how things were maybe done, the work context within a Japanese company?
So I was actually pleasantly surprised by the amount of autonomy that I had. Especially, I kind of expected more hand-holding at the start. I quickly realized that you need to understand when you need help and you need to have the courage to seek it out. Because in my previous work, like either in academic projects or academic research or like my internships, I had some supervisor who could see that, okay, I'm not making progress. So they used to intervene and help me out. But I don't know if it's about Japan or if it's about Mercari or if it's about like joining as a full-time employee, but I had to be a lot more driven in seeking out help from right people. I think there's a classic guide on Stack Overflow, how to ask the right question. I found that pretty handy the first couple of months.
So I guess when you are a new engineer at a company, there's a lot that you need to kind of get used to, like the company culture can be a bit different from, like you mentioned, the academic projects and stuff like that you worked on in the past. And sometimes there is this balance that you need to find between asking people questions versus figuring stuff out yourself. But it's like you kind of need to get feel for like when it's okay to kind of just ask the person, take some of their time and have them explain it to you versus like if you don't know like which direction you're supposed to be kind of going in, then you do need to be kind of checking with people, I guess, right? So you feel like you got a pretty good handle on how to do that within at least the Mercari like company culture pretty quickly.
Yeah. It's like, how do I say? I think birds throw off their young ones into sky and like go fly. It was kind of a similar situation, but I learned to fly, so it's all good.
Not everyone does, right? Of course, they sometimes will come to Japan, realize it's maybe not for them, and go home. Not the end of the world either, but you kind of figured out what you needed to integrate into the workplace here. And was the language barrier an issue at all, or how was that? Like, what was the mix like in terms of English versus Japanese? How did you kind of navigate that?
I think the language barrier, I didn't really experience it in Tokyo. And I think to this day, I don't experience it in Tokyo because like Japanese people expect that, oh, foreigners come here. They're very helpful to sort those things out. But as soon as you travel outside Tokyo, you'll realize the importance of speaking the language. And for the first 2 or 3 years I was at Mercari, I only met Japanese co-workers who could speak English. So I was like, okay, everyone speaks English that I need to talk about. But only after you achieve a certain level of fluency, you realize there's a big group of Japanese people, even at work, that don't approach you because you don't speak Japanese or they think you don't speak Japanese. So, for example, in my new team, I had a couple of Japanese co-workers and I introduced them to myself, like, oh, I've been here for 5 years. And they were quite surprised I speak Japanese. And I was like, why are you surprised? And they had no answer, but I know why. But yeah, I think if you work in a company with an international working style or working environment, the expectation is foreigners don't learn Japanese. And I think it's largely true.
But it's like, I put in all this work to learn this language. Like, please give me a chance to like show this Japanese that I can speak, right?
I think you had tweeted out some time ago about the JLPT results. Like at N5, you are at, I speak whatever language. N3 is like, oh, I expect full fluency. Why is no one talking to me in Japanese? Right. And at N1, like once you are at N1 fluency, you're like, you don't care. You just speak in whatever language. Right. Yeah, I think I had a similar phase. Like 2 years ago, I was like very angry. Like, why does the staff not speak to me in Japanese? Why do they think I'm tourist or something? But now I think I'm at the point like, oh, it doesn't matter. I'll just speak in whichever language they speak to.
Yeah, I went through a very similar experience where there was a period of time where like I was working so hard to learn the language and I just wanted people to like speak it to me, and I would get kind of frustrated when they didn't. And then eventually you just hit the point of like, whatever, you know. I am who I am, you know? Yeah, exactly. And like the people who whose like opinion and everything I really care about, who are like close to me and everything, they know that I speak it. They will talk, you know, they'll speak to me in Japanese or whatever. I have my own kind of group, and it doesn't really matter what like random people that I'm going to talk to once a month at work or whatever do, you know, it doesn't really impact you much. So you can kind of build that your own little like micro environment that is, filled with people who do understand you and your level and everything. So I don't think it's worth really getting angry about, but I definitely understand when people express frustration about that. But it sounds like it wasn't too big of a deal though. So the point about how, because they assume that you don't speak Japanese is very interesting. It is kind of amazing how kind of putting yourself out there and I guess kind of showing that you do speak Japanese does open a lot of doors, and you end up being able to kind of do things that you might not have expected to be able to. Yeah. And I do think that is a really good point.
I think at Mercari, I don't need to speak the language. I definitely found speaking the language to a conversational degree helped a lot more, because there are co-workers who are just learning English. Like maybe they're learning English after they move to Mercari or something like that. So even communicating with them in broken English and Japanese kind of builds more confidence in the other person to speak with you. I've had meetings where the product manager is asking all her questions in Japanese and I'm replying in English, and both of us can understand each other, and
That's
we don't
awesome.
need a translator. So yeah, I think like speaking the language definitely unlocked opportunities for me that friends, like coworkers who don't speak Japanese, did not have access to. But yeah,
Wow.
it's not expected, but it happens.
So you would recommend for someone who wants to maybe work in Japan, even if they're in an environment that doesn't technically require it, you think that there are a lot of benefits, even in that kind of situation, to learning at least a decent amount, like some, conversational skills in Japanese. Cool.
I think like a easier example would be if I'm a backend engineer and I have to review the Figma design for the app, it's going to be all in Japanese if it's for Japanese users. And I mean, yeah, you can use Google Translate everywhere, but
Yeah, but like higher quality feedback, basically, that's informed by what's actually on the screens, like because you can actually read the text and get a better understanding, maybe faster as well than you would if you had to have it all kind of directly explained to you, or like trying to be translating things via Google and stuff like that. I agree. I think there's pretty much no downside to learning a language. Obviously, it takes time. I think it opens up so many doors, both at work and just in your kind of daily life as well, that I also recommend people to at least learn an amount where you can kind of get by day to day. I think it makes a big difference. And that tends to help people not get too isolated because it's easy to kind of fall into the trap of just joining the kind of foreigner bubble and getting kind of stuck there. But yeah, so you mentioned, well, you worked on a couple of different products within Mercari. The first one was actually Mercari US, which was the American version of the Mercari Marketplace app, which is kind of its own. It's a little bit complex, but it's basically they have a satellite office in the US, in California, where they're building this other app. It looks totally different, a separate code base and everything. There are people working on that product from the headquarters back in Tokyo. At least at the time, it was the US at Tokyo team. So it was kind of a unique situation working on a US product from Japan, having just arrived from India. So it's like, what was that like, I guess, is my question. Like, to be now in a Japanese company, so there's like that culture. And then there's also working on the US app, which kind of has its own culture, because it's like there are a lot of people from the US also that you're working directly with for it. And the product is for that audience. So how was it like trying to figure all of that out?
So I think first off, I was very glad that I got to work in a Silicon Valley style startup while being in Japan. So I got to experience like the raw pace and like the decision making speed. I think it was actually easier for me to work on the US product rather than the Japan product, because a lot of global products that we use are built in US or around US ideologies like Facebook, WhatsApp, Google, Amazon, everything. To me, the design for the Japan product made little sense and the US product made sense. And at that time, I was speaking to Mercari US's CTO. Why is this? And he mentioned that Mercari launched in 2013. And 1 year later, when they launched in US, when they had the same app, people in US felt like this is a scam. So they had to completely branch off and make a separate app. And I think I can talk about this because all this is public information. I think working on the US product and living in Japan, I could see what the US customers like value more and what Japanese customers value more. A simple example is, I think in US, it's literally the land of dreams and aspirations. So there was one feature that didn't do much, but just tracked the sales of a person. It was called goals. So people could say like save $1,000 for their Hawaii vacation. And people use the feature a lot, although it was not increasing their transactions. It was not improving how their buying or selling experience. I got to experience that. Actually, there were a lot of problems in the US market that made its way to Japan after some time. For example, keyword stuffing, the spam bot stuff, keyword stuffing, abusing public comments on an item, the strong filtering on search results. These features were very unique to the US product. And actually, when I moved to Mercari Japan, I kind of took some of the things and I was like, this is a brand new idea that I have. Why don't you do it? And like even authentication and like fake copies and stuff like that. So it was, I think, working for the US product in like a US based environment was helpful for my personal growth as well, because this was my first time working in a multicultural environment. And I think, okay, what's funny, what's offensive? I could get a read of that much better. the confidence that I built working in Mercari US allowed me to carry that confidence in a foreign language, Japanese. So even though I'm only conversational at Japanese, I could defend my design decisions or ask for feature changes in front of Japanese coworkers. Yeah, I think I preferred it. This was kind of by accident, not by design, but I preferred it this way.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I guess since it was a US app, a lot of the intuitions about the design and stuff like that are going to be a lot more similar to maybe the apps that you kind of grew up using, Facebook and Instagram and whatever, all those types of things. I guess that makes it a bit easier. And I think it also makes it so that you can feel like your ideas are maybe a little bit more valuable because you're kind of thinking along the same lines, and maybe you're closer to because ultimately you're building features for a user, and you feel like maybe your thought process is more similar to theirs, whereas the Japanese app is a little bit further away from that. So it's harder to kind of reason about like what kind of design should we do? Like how should we, implement this feature? And it could be, I guess, pretty frustrating because you have your intuition about it where it's like, oh, it should obviously be this way. But then you A/B test that and no one likes that. And they just like it this other way where to you feels odd, but that's, just the preferred way to do it, I guess, in Japan. It's maybe good that you started out on the US side because you then switched into actually working on the Japan focused app at some point, right? Was that a bit of a process kind of getting used to that?
There's this famous law that is repeated often at work called Conway's Law, that the organization kind of becomes a copy of the communication style of the organization. Although Mercari has a global working force, it's hard to explain in words, but a foreigner working for the Japanese product behaved in a more Japanese manner than a Japanese person working for the US product in terms of seeking approvals, the hierarchy structure and stuff like that.
Because those are kind of like the major rules, the culture, I guess, of those different organizations are such that you end up doing things in a very Japanese way, I guess, right?
And that percolates even like down to the base level of engineers. When I was working for the US product, if another team is making changes to my code base, they just make the code change. They say, here's the PR, here's the design document. Let me know what I need to change. I'll change it in the design doc and the PR simultaneously. Whereas in Japan, like for the Japanese product, they share the design doc first. They're like, oh, can we make this change? Is this the right service to make it? And then they need help with the PR. So you could see like the processes affect like even engineers who maybe don't need to speak Japanese even. So yeah, that was interesting. Like I think both are fine, but there's a definite difference of working style.
And I'm curious, like, did you kind of have a sense of that? And like, did you appreciate that you were able to kind of use English and work directly with people in Silicon Valley and kind of work with a lot of the top people basically in the ecosystem? Or like, did you like slowly kind of realize that, or did you take it for granted at all? Or was it like, did you assume that was like how all companies were? Because it's not, FYI. Like, how did you kind of come to that realization?
So I definitely took it for granted, like even the US product first and like just working in Japan. At that point, maybe, I was naive. I was barely 20, 21, whatever. And I had a lot of optimism and stuff like, oh, it's very easy to move to US. Like I just need to apply to the job and they fly me over. But yeah, I realized how difficult it is actually for people to work in a US company. So I'm glad I got to experience that without having to go through all the hurdles of working in US. I think while I was in Japan, some of my friends are working at traditional Japanese companies. So even if they have to ask for a sick leave, they need to write in Japanese. So their Japanese is much better than mine, but I could see the marked difference. And I think, I'm glad things worked out this way because I don't think I would have survived.
So you've been able to see that contrast now of like, oh, wow. Like the majority of companies are more like this kind of work style.
Yes.
Where, maybe there's a lot more like red tape. Things maybe move a bit slower. Maybe the technologies being used and things like that might not be as cutting edge. There's probably a lot less, collaboration with overseas teams and stuff like that. It depends on the company. There are plenty of other like international companies, of course. It's a pretty unique environment, I think. I had a little bit of a different experience where I came to Japan, did the English teaching thing for a year, and then kind of jumped around a bunch of different startups. And none of them were like terrible at all. They were all pretty good. I definitely heard some horror stories, and depending on like the kind of companies that I was looking at, they were not all like Mercari. So I think when I joined Mercari, I was like, wow, like it's like working in the US or like, somewhere like that. Those are what I try to recommend to people, but they're not the default,
Yeah, I think that's another thing I'm thankful for as well. Like I speak to people who want to move to Japan, and yeah, the ALT route is what they take. And for me, I just had to finish university and just take a flight. So I definitely recognize the difference there. And I'm like, I had it easy. People will accuse me, you had it easy. I was like, yes, I'll accept that.
So, what are you working on now? I mean, you're still working on the Japanese side of the Mercari, like kind of marketplace. What kind of stuff? I mean, I guess back end. I mean, it doesn't have to be super like specific or anything, but like, what kind of stuff are you working on?
As my time at Mercari increases, I've like for the past 1.5 or 2 years, I've worked on increasingly complex projects. So at the start, maybe like 2 years ago, I was responsible for 3 services. So I only had to handle those, and like if there are requests from other teams. But as time passed, I built more user-facing features. I was in charge of like I was the lead developer, but like it was only 4 engineers, so not really the lead developer. But as time passed, like those team size increased from 4 to 8, and I think last quarter, I was kind of the project lead for 15 engineers.
Oh my
So
gosh.
my role increased as well as the technically I had good career growth as well. Earlier, I was only responsible for 3 services. Then I started contributing to services that use those 3 services. And I think for the last quarter, I worked on maybe 10 services, 9 of which I had never worked before on.
Wow.
So I think I got good career opportunities as well.